I have today ordered to Vietnam forces which will raise our fighting strength from 75,000 to 125,000 men almost immediately.
People have got to know whether or not their president's a crook. Well, I'm not a crook.
We did not, repeat, did not trade weapons or anything else for hostages, nor will we.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky.
Brownie, you're doing a heck of a job. The FEMA director's working 24.
Every second term gets one. Greatest hits in the second term, according to Paul Gigot, right there. How does President Obama avoid the second term? Of course, we're going to get into that in a little bit. But first, let's talk about the election. Katrina, vanden Heuvel, let me bring you in first from The Nation. You know, a lot of polling showed the president was going to win this coming into the last day. But I think a lot of people were very surprised by how sweeping the victory was in the battleground states in the Electoral College.
Well, I think you saw an ascendant coalition. The rising American electorate of Latinos, African Americans, women, working people. And I think you also saw, George, an element of fairness, two visions competing. You're on your own, Jack, which is what Mitt Romney, the 1%, walking, talking 1% put out there, and President Obama, who said, we're in this together. So you saw in Ohio, the most important state, President Obama, Sherrod Brown, now returned to the Senate, speaking to issues of fairness, speaking about the role of the auto industry rescue, the role of government. These are important issues. And then on the other side, you had a Republican Party, a discredited brand with a shrinking base, out of touch with the values that seem to be moving very quickly in this country.
So when you talk about this Senate coalition, let me bring this to Paul Gigot. Was this a race that Mitt Romney could have won, or is demography making it impossible?
No, of course he could have won. I mean, he only lost by 100,000 votes in Ohio. He only lost by less than that in Florida. I believe the final
70,000.
So this was a lot closer than Katrina suggests that it was. I think what you saw is that what $100 million worth of unanswered ads, attack ads from May through July can do to an alternative candidate. Mitt Romney ran as a biographical candidate fundamentally. I'm a businessman who knows how to create jobs. What the Obama campaign did was systematically destroy that biography. And you saw that he never recovered from the summer. In the exit polls, it showed that Mitt Romney still had a net unfavorable rating, and he only broke even on the economy. He barely
got it up above into the positive range in the last 48 hours or so.
Well, but in the exit polls, it actually was a net unfavorable. So the electorate that turned out never really warmed at all to Mitt Romney. So I think this was more about a flawed messenger than a flawed message. There are problems with the immigration position of the Republican Party. We can talk about that. But fundamentally, Mitt Romney never made the sale. And there was one other thing that's stunning. You looked at the economy, and the exit polls still blamed George W. Bush for the economic problems. 53%. And Mitt Romney never separated himself from George Bush.
I wanted to get to Greta, but one follow-up right here. You talk about that period from April to August, where Mitt Romney was outspent in all the battleground states. Some second-guessing going on. Should he have reached into his own pocket and spent his own money there?
Well, if he wanted to win, clearly they needed to respond somehow, and they didn't. And that was a strategic mistake by the campaign.
He got beaten. You know, he just plain flat got out and got beaten. They completely ignored the Hispanic vote. They never seemed to have any effort to bring the Hispanic vote into the tent. You know, that was a huge mistake, and he's feeling it. It was not such a huge margin, I don't think. Electorally, it was a huge margin, over 100 votes in the Electoral College, probably how about 120?
That's a pretty big one.
Yeah, no,
that's huge. No, that's huge. But if you look at the popular vote across the country, it was not that big. The president clearly won. House got extra, Senate got extra, the Democratic Party won, but it was not such a huge resounding. You know, we have a lot of problems facing this country, the fiscal cliff being one of them that's descending upon us. But the president won. Governor Romney's campaign didn't do as good a job, and they certainly didn't do anything about the Hispanic vote. One
of the other big things the president's team did, Congresswoman Edwards, is this organization throughout the battleground states. Not only did they get this coalition of the Senate, but they made sure they made the most of every single voter out there.
Well, they did. I mean, they had a huge get out the vote operation, but that was turned on for a very long time. I mean, in really going after low propensity voters, making sure that you could actually pull together that coalition of women. The president won, Latinos, the president won, African Americans, the president won. The president actually won the middle class, and I think it was actually a decisive electoral college victory, and frankly, the popular vote as well. I mean, when you look at Florida, the difference between, you know, a Bush win in Florida of 500 137 votes and an Obama win in Florida of 74,000 votes. It was a pretty decisive victory for Democrats across the board, House and Senate. I mean, even in the House, we picked up, you know, seven seats, and you know, so that's not enough to take the majority. But it's really pretty clear, I think, that the public got the president's message. He got it across, and he got his voters
Congressman
out.
Schock, one group that the Congresswoman left out there is young people under 30. They also went heavily towards President Obama. You're a little bit over that right now, but what lesson does your party have to take away from all this?
We got to do a better job with young people. We got to do a better job with women. But the group that we really have to zero in on, I believe, is the Latino community, a group that really should be voting for Republicans to the degree we take a leadership role on the issue of immigration. And I think it makes sense for Republicans to get out front on immigration because it's a broke government program. And who better to fix a broken government program than the Republican Party? It shouldn't take 8 years on the average to figure out whether or not you qualify to become an American citizen. I think George W. Bush was trying to do that pre-September 11th. I think it's unfortunate that our party, when we controlled the entire process, didn't do more on the issue. I'm disappointed the president in his first 4 years, despite a pledge to do so, didn't put forward a comprehensive immigration proposal. And I think the mandate that came out of this election after $2 billion being spent, and we get the status quo, the mandate is to work together. We still have divided government, and the American people are expecting us to work together.
I don't think this was not a status quo election. This was a decisive win for a different set of values. Both the social values, the issues of immigration, of fairness, of dignity, but also of rebuilding a middle class that has been really hit hard in these last 30, 40 years. So that is not a status quo election.
You would have thought that would have gone, though. I mean, if the economic issue were the only issue, you would have thought that.
But it wasn't. The social values
but I'm
as
just
well,
saying
linked to the economic security.
Because you know, the president had a tough argument to brag on the economy. He had a real tough argument this time. I mean, it has not been vibrant, robust, or anything else. And that was what Governor Romney ran on. Obviously, the voters were not particularly impressed.
Although one of the things that might have been happening at the end, you have from September forward consumer confidence going up, home sales going up. You had good jobs numbers basically for the last 6 months. He had a little bit of a wind at his back.
But you've also got, but let's not forget the inner city, which everyone seems to ignore. Let's see, the inner city in very tough times for a lot of people. If you look at the numbers that just came out last week on food stamps, the last number is the most recent number is August, went up about 421,000 people in the month of August for food stamps. We're now at 47 million.
But I'm just saying, did not lose the inner city.
And nor did it help.
But I'm saying is that, you know, that the economy in those areas, everyone has completely ignored it.
In the second term, I think there will be a commitment out of this White House to pay attention to those issues. But, you know, it didn't help that the Republican Party traveled the country calling the president a food stamp president. That he has done more in in the recovery program. There was more anti-poverty funding than there had been since Lyndon Johnson's
I want to pick up on something. Hold on a second. I want to pick up on something that Congressman Schock was just talking about, immigration, because you've heard that Paul Gigot from a chorus of Republicans since the election. House Speaker John Boehner, Sean Hannity, saying he's evolved on the issue of immigration.
You point at me.
Is it? Well, you're
Do I look like Sean Hannity? You point at me.
But two questions. Will it happen now? And is that enough for the Republican Party? Is it simply fixing the immigration problem the key to the future?
It's not the only thing they need to do, but I think it's an important threshold issue for an awful lot of not just Hispanic voters, but also Asian voters. I mean, the Republican share of the Asian vote has shrunk from 42% in 2004, 33% in 2008, 26% this time. Now, why in the world should Indian Americans or Chinese Americans vote so much less for Republicans now than 8 years ago?
What's the answer?
Well, I think the answer is they're getting a message. They're getting a message that says you're really not welcome. I think part of that is the threshold question of immigration, and the Republicans need to address that. If the iceberg breaks up on immigration, on the conservative part of the Republican coalition, there has been an unwillingness to consider immigration reform. It's just been closed off. So you saw Mitt Romney not be willing to address that and use words like self-deportation. A lot of us on the right have been pushing for immigration reform for a long time.
I don't think, though, the Democrats have done a terrific amount in that area either. I went to that speech that President Obama gave at American University where he talked about what he's going to do with immigration. He had the House and the Senate and then nothing. Neither party has done anything, and they're both intransigent. They won't talk to each other. They won't do it. It's both these parties.
But Greta, I agree with you to a point, but don't forget that it took the organizing of the Dreamers to push President Obama to do what he did with executive action. And I think you're going to see more of that. And the Republican Party has been just closed off to any of those voices.
When Democrats were in charge of the House, we in fact passed the DREAM Act out of the House and could not break a filibuster in the Senate to make sure that we could move that to the president. Now, wait a second now, because it was Republicans who stood in the way of that. And I don't think that getting the Latino and Hispanic vote is just about immigration. Yes. It also is about a core set of values that believes in building the middle class. This is what the president has committed to, strengthening our protections and opportunities for education. Hispanics care about those things.
I want to get into that because we've talked about immigration, but of course the big immediate challenge facing both Democrats and Republicans now in Washington, the president, as well, this fiscal cliff coming up on December 31st. And also, it gets into the whole question of what the mandate of the election was. Let's hear from both the Speaker and the President on that.
If there's a mandate in yesterday's results, it's a mandate for us to find a way to work together on the solutions to the challenges that we all face as a nation.
On Tuesday night, we found out that the majority of Americans agree with my approach. And that includes Democrats, independents, and a lot of Republicans across the country.
President, there was some tougher talk than perhaps we saw before, but let me go to Congressman Schock with this, because you were echoing the words of the Speaker there, saying the mandate is for people to work together. A lot of reporting that the Speaker was very firm with members of your conference this time around, that he wants to make sure they fall in line behind his leadership on getting a deal. What I'd like to press on is, what does that mean this time around? Is your conference ready to come forward with some revenues to make a deal work?
Well, I think as you saw in the Bob Woodward book, the evidence is out there. John Boehner extended a hand of revenue last time, nearly $800 billion of revenue, and the president walked away from the table of $800 billion, wanting over $1 trillion in revenue. I think our conference stands ready behind our speaker on the issue of revenue, primarily through loophole elimination and deduction elimination, through tax reform. But what we really need from the president is leadership. We need from the president the other side of the ledger. He talked throughout his campaign about a balanced approach. He's talked about raising taxes on filers over $250,000. But the fact is, even if he gets what he wants, which is a tax increase on people over $250,000, that's $80 billion a year when we're running $1 trillion deficit. So where the president needs to lead is put forward a budget, put forward a plan that deals with the major drivers of our debt. If he doesn't like the premium support program for Medicare, if he doesn't like some of our reforms to the drivers of debt, that's fine. But we can't negotiate with ourselves. And at this point, the House is the only one who has led on these issues.
The president had some of those ideas in his in the ideas that he brought to the speaker. But one of the questions, Congresswoman, is will the Democratic caucus follow him on that?
Well, I think that one of the things that the president has said, and we heard this last week, is that he really does want a balanced approach to this. He has put on the table $1 trillion over 10 years with removing the tax cuts for filers over $250,000. And he ran on this. And so it's not like the American people didn't hear what he said during the election and aren't buying.
And Paul Gigot, the president does seem pretty determined. And he had Jay Carney come out on Friday as well, saying he's not going to sign. He would veto anything that extends the tax rates for people over $250,000. I listened to all the leaders over the last several days, and I know everyone's saying they want to work together. I think the chances of America going off the cliff are at least 35%.
Yeah, I agree with you. I do. I mean, if that was an olive branch, I'd hate to see the stick that the president offered. He really made no concessions at all. And I think the problem that he has is, above all, we're talking like accountants here, all right, and balancing but what he needs above all is growth, economic growth, faster growth, 3 to 4% growth. That's what carried Reagan and Clinton in their second terms.
I agree with Paul Gigot. Americans voted decisively for fair share taxes on the richest, for protecting Social Security, Medicare, but also for growth and investment. You cannot get growth and investment with the spending cuts as they are laid out in the grand bargain.
And certainly not the sequester.
And certainly not the sequester. So I think part of the problem we're having, George, is the fundamental assumptions overriding this entire discussion. Senator Murray said that we have a big debt and deficit problem. No, we don't. We have a big public investment and jobs problem. We do. And we are not, let me just last point. We are not Greece.
Wait a second.
Austerity, if you believe in evidence-based politics and economics, you look at what is going on in Europe, and austerity, which we may have American style in this country if we proceed the way we are doing, has led to economic pain, has led to killing growth, and debt and deficits.
It's my turn on this. And you know what I don't understand? How the American people have let all these members of Congress, the Senate, and the President off the hook. We're now going to go off the fiscal cliff. No, it's not a now. We've known about this since at least July of last year. And all they've done is absolutely nothing.
Nothing could get done during the presidential campaign.
Yes,
it's not possible.
But that's the deplorable thing, is that we all sort of say, well, that's the way it is. Nothing ever gets done. You know, the American people, I'm surprised at the American people. Everyone knows about this, but the whole government's been on stall. Nothing has been done. They've known about it, and that we're supposed to say, well, that's the way it is. That's the way it's always done. Now we've got this fiscal cliff where a lot of American people are really going to get hurt.
The best way to get action
that's
is
right,
to actually force it.
Yes, well, and Greta, I think that what the president has laid out, I think he's been very reasonable. He said, you know what, we do need balance. We'll remove those tax breaks for the wealthiest. We'll make investments that we need to in infrastructure, in education, in research and development, the things that are actually going to make us competitive and actually contribute to the growth that all of us want. And I think that it's incumbent now for a slimmer Republican majority in the House, a larger majority in the Senate, and the president to actually come together where we can. We all actually agree that we need to keep those tax cuts for people making up to $250,000. Let's just pass that and do it. Here's part of the question
for you, Congressman Schock. I think there's some bipartisan agreement that closing loopholes would be a way to go, to raise revenue. The problem has been the math of that you can't get enough to actually fill the hole by simply closing loopholes and deductions for the wealthy.
Well, I'm glad you bring up math, because once again, we've heard about, the president's plan to raise taxes on wealthy individuals as a means to deal with our debt crisis. But the reality is the math doesn't add up. We can't tax our way out of debt. Okay, that's the fact. And so whether we have to deliver a calculator to the White House in order to get a budget from him that works, I'm not willing to go along with the straight-up tax increase that the president wants, okay? But even if he gets what he wants, if he's going to lay out a balanced approach, it needs to be balanced. Okay, Mr. President, you want to raise taxes by $100 billion a year or $1 trillion over 10 years. We're running $1 trillion deficit every year. The reason why you don't have a lot of optimism coming out of the Republican conference is we've been out there leading with our chin the last 2 years on a budget. The president has criticized us left and right over our proposals and given us no countervailing proposals.
George, what strikes me in the exit polls,
how about waste? But the thing is, neither party is talking about waste. I mean, you're talking about, no, they aren't. They're not.
Waste is
everybody wants to talk about waste.
It's a culture. It's a culture. It's part of the culture.
What strikes me is, if you look at the exit polls, majority of voters, didn't say deficits were their main concern. It was about jobs and growth. You can't cut your way to growth. So
you can't tax your way to growth either.
But a tax cut has never built a bridge or helped with the deteriorating infrastructure of this country. I think you put people to work, and my proposal is you don't let spending cuts kick in until you have unemployment of 5 to 6%. Then you have a healthy country growing, and then you turn to the issue of recovery of debt and deficits. I think, though, more important is the president needs to go out to the country and speak to those voters who said that their main priority was growth and jobs. And I think how he does this will set the tone for his second administration. Expose the Republicans.
That's why he was out the way he was out on Friday. I want to get to one more issue before we take a break. Kind of remarkable evolution on social issues in this election as well. We saw 3 states pass referendums on gay marriage, legalizing gay marriage. Also, both Colorado and Washington legalizing recreational use of marijuana. And Congressman Edwards, let me begin with you first. We still have a red-blue divide on gay marriage, but this was significant in your home state of Maryland.
Well, that's right. I mean, my home state of Maryland actually passed our Marriage Equality Act, and it passed by, a narrow margin, but it means that we've come, quite a distance. We also passed the DREAM Act in Maryland as well. And so, I mean, I think that what you're seeing is an evolution across the board, and people are saying, you know what, we actually don't need the government in the middle of our bedrooms deciding what it is that we do, and we need to end discrimination across the board. And so whether you're, gay or straight, and in Maryland at least, you'll have the ability to get married.
Is this healthy development, having these initiatives?
I think it is, because I think what you're doing is you're seeing really very contentious cultural issues where we have this divide, as you said, being settled democratically. That is at the ballot box through a process through which both sides have to accept, because that's the way we do things in this country. And I think letting that play out in the states, as opposed to some kind of judicial imposition from above is the way to handle this over time.
I wonder if this is going to make, you're a lawyer, Greta, I wonder if this is going to make the Supreme Court more or less likely to take on the issue of gay marriage this term.
Well, what's so significant about this is that it wasn't a legislature. This was the people of the state speaking. That's what's so dramatically different than any of the state legislatures. This is a big difference in what we have. These are the people in their states and states' rights, and they've made the decision. I think the more interesting is the marijuana, because that conflicts with federal law, and and I don't know how they're going to reconcile that. The Supreme Court is going to have to take that.
The Attorney General has been silent on that so far. They didn't want to talk about it.
I'm hoping that the President and the Attorney General use this opportunity to ratchet down the drug war, which would really disproportionately benefit Latinos and African Americans. And after all, it's what the three last presidents of this country did when they were young: recreational use of marijuana.
They didn't inhale.
They didn't inhale. But I think it is, as Donna said, I think you're seeing an astonishing transformation of the tolerance and the social values and the idea that young people especially don't want government in their bedrooms. If I could, one proposition I find really interesting is the one in California is showing that the kind of anti-tax hysteria has abated. I think that was an important one for the future.
Good luck, California, with your
Quickly,
economy.
what should the Justice Department do now on these issues in Colorado and Washington? Should they enforce federal law or let it go?
Well, I think if I look at Supreme Court precedents, I think that they would be overturned. I mean, it just conflicts with federal law, and it seems to me that.
But so did Arizona with the immigration. I mean, they've got also.
And they overturned some of that too. So I don't think this will hold up, at least under current Supreme Court precedent.